So we are holding on the fifth page of the copies. It's page test in the Dvar Malchus, and we were speaking about that. Though on the one hand we say Reishis Goyim Amalek, that Amalek is beyond. He's the level of a Makim. He transcends all the Goyim. That's why he's called the first, not because he is part of one of seven. No, there's the seven umas, the seven nations that are the source for the 70 nations. But Amalek stands aloof and beyond them. He's Reishis Goyim Amalek. Despite that, even though he is much worse than Amalek, I'm sorry, much worse than all the other Goyim are able to be influenced by his bonus. By having the correct meditation, you can transfer your love, which is the first one of the Goyim, instead of being a love for Klippa, to be a love for Kedusha, same thing Yira, and all the seven midas. When it comes to Amalek is chutzpah b'lei tag. Amalek is a chutzpah without a crown. There's no reason. Not only that, he knows his master and he means to rebel against him. So there's no logic to him. There's no rational words we could use to impact him. That's why he's worse. That's why he's way beyond all the guys. Yet at the very same time, we're calling him the Reishis to the Goy. The fact that we're calling him the Reishis to the Goy means that he impacts and influences the Goy. And he brings the example of what the Chazal say. It's like the person that jumped into the hot bath, he cools it off for everyone else. The same thing, Amalek, by attacking the Yidden, he made Yidden look easier to attack. The same thing spiritually, though Amalek is of a totally different caliber of Klippa than all the rest of the seven nations, or all the seven nations in addition, still in all, he's called the Reishis to them. He influences them, he impacts them. And to be able to explain that, he brings an example of what's called Turich HaShoicha. Turich HaShoicha is a term that the Chazal use when they're talking about behind, the darkest forests and wilderness, the most darkest, uncivilized area, beyond the mountains of darkness. So I'll use that, and I think concerning Alexander going over there. But in Kabbalah, we use it both in a negative, obviously, Turich Shoicha, mountains shows on ego and yesh, and it's something that's very big, plus darkness, obviously. But also we brought Turich HaShoicha, mountains of darkness, in regards to midos of Kedusha. Midos of Kedusha, the Zohar refers to as Turich HaShoicha, because Ahava especially is called the level of mountain. It says, K'Avram shekol parei har, that Avram Avinu called and referred to Kedusha in the way of Har, mountain. We know Avram Avinu's Avodah was the Avodah of Chesed, but also Midas in general is expansive. It's likened to a mountain. And the mountains of darkness, why do we call them darkness? Because the source of the Midas come from a place that's beyond revelation. The level of Keser is like a level of darkness. We say that the Midas maintain in it the full force of the power of Keser, even after they come down from Keser. They come down into Atzilus. And the term that he uses is that they are mizbarer, ayidei, they become refined. They take on a more edel type of way. Still in all, the midos tend to have a power to them that is super rational. In many Mamar Chassidus, he brings down this idea that intellect is limited, and therefore the emotions that are created by the intellect should also be limited. Yet we find that it's not that way. The intellect will only reveal and trigger the emotions But since the emotions have a source that's higher than the intellect, it will go full force ahead. So just like we have in Kiddush, that the midos, despite Seichel's impact upon Kesser, still connects to the midos, and Kesser influences the midos and imparts a greater power to the midos than what would be if the midos would be only based on intellect. This is what we concluded with yesterday. So, in a similar vein, we could understand how, in the midos of Klippa, which is the seven nations, that ordinarily intellectual meditation should be able to take care of them and change them. But Amalek, being a Rashis Goyim Amalek, he is connected to them after all, despite being deeper and worse than them. But it's like the impact that Kesser of Kedusha has on the midas of Kedusha, so too Rashis Goyim Amalek, which is the counterpart, the Le'umazah of Kesser, has that same impact in a negative fashion, the same influence in a negative fashion on the midas of Klippa as well, and turns the Goyim that are normally the seven nations that are normally easily transformed through intellect into being more difficult to deal with. Let's see the way the Rebbe concludes it. Again, we're holding on page 5, page test, line 2. In a similar vein, also in the mountains of darkness of Klippa, which means the level that's like the counter level to Kesser. It's the level that would be the Kesser of Klippa. Still in all, these mountains of darkness, though the mountains themselves, meaning the midas themselves, which are likened to mountains, they can be refined through the meditation, through the intellect, like we spoke about before, that the seven nations is our avodah now, to use our intellect to refine them and so on. Still in all because of the fact that Amalek is the beginning and the first of the nations of the Goyim. So now, in the emotions of the seven nations, which are normally susceptible to intellect, even though they still must be susceptible to intellect, but they still get a greater stubbornness, and they're more difficult, and they get the power of the klippa similar to the chutzpah without a crown of Amalek, the unreasoning, irrational type of approach of Amalek. That's what it means. The first in the beginning of the Goyim is Amalek, and his end is be lost forever. The Chivush Amalek is going to Nisrael. Since Amalek is the beginning of the nations, like we explained previously, he's the worst of them. He is above and beyond any of the negative nations. Therefore, his end has to be that he's also lost forever. Why is that? Because then it will also completely release his hold that he has on the nations. This also matters for refining the other nations as well, because when Amalek is destroyed, he releases his hold that he has on the other nations, and now the other nations can be elevated through rational meditation in a way that it's not possible to do completely beforehand while Amalek still exists. Okay, so now that we explained the difference between Amalek and the other nations and what does it mean, Reishis Goyim Amalek, now we're going to explain the order of things. We said before, there's Zachar Esher Aslach Amalek, there has to be Minui Melech, the appointing of a king, and then after you have Zachar Esher Aslach, you remember it, and you have the appointing of the king, then finally you can come to Machai Timcha, when they go into Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah they have to do is the destruction of Amalek. In a Amalek to be able to affect the nullification and the sublimation of the clip of Amalek. So there has to be also in Kedusha the avoidance beyond reason and knowledge. In other words, you got to fight fire with fire to counter the irrationality of Amalek, since rational reasoning will not work with Amalek. The only way to counter it is with going with the irrationality of Kedusha, super rational. Just the Kedusha, like in the Mamarim of Basilagani. So much a cause of Zohar, that's what it says the Pasuk. Remember what he did to you. Remembrance has to do with being beyond intellect. It's super rational. The idea of remembrance is what's called Moichin of Chachma, the level of Sfiras HaChachma, Shalamayla Ma'aseichot, beyond intellect, Lamayla Ma'avonav Ha'asagid, is beyond understanding and comprehension. General, Bina is associated with understanding and comprehension, and the term that's often used about Chachma is it's Makar HaSeichel, it's the source where the intellect comes from. Meaning, you say it's the source where intellect comes from, that means it's beyond intellect. So what's the difference? How is the source of intellect able to counter Amalek, which that's the idea of Zachar? It says in line 17, the idea of understanding and comprehension, logic, intellect, rational reasoning changes over time. As we go through years, our mind changes. Like it says, the more years, Chachma becomes more known. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, these are things that are subject to change. What I understood yesterday is not the same I understand today, and it's not understood in the same way today. So that has changeability. That is not the way counter Amalek. As opposed to the idea of remembrance. Memory, what does memory mean? You remember something, that means despite the fact that time passed, this thing still matters to me. Why do I not remember what I ate 5 years ago? Because it's not something that is connected to my very essence. It's who cares? Whereas if it's an impactful event, so then I will remember it the same thing as if it happened. Could have happened 50 years ago. I'll remember it as if it happened today. That expression goes. So the idea of memory goes beyond the changes of time. It says, therefore, he remembers constantly without changes. Since memory is beyond understanding and comprehension, because it could be things that you even understood, you're going to forget. But memory are even things beyond that. It's beyond the idea of understanding. So since it's beyond understanding, that is the level to counter Amalek. Therefore, only through memory do we nullify and do we remove and do we destroy the clip of Amalek. Goes on further and he says, now we could also understand also the connection of appointing a king with erasing Amalek. That we said the 3 mitzvahs of the Eden going to Israel, appointing a king, destroying Amalek, and then you build the Beis Hamikdash. But before you could have the destruction of Amalek, you need to first appoint a king. For the hundreds of years that Eden were in Eretz Yisrael, before Shaul Amalek was king, you didn't have a mitzvah of destroying Amalek. What's the connection? Because the king also is an embodiment and corresponds to this level of a bittul that's beyond reason. He needs to be Gemara's brought on. The Gemara, we've had this also in the other Maimer Shahed. You could have a Baruch was like Bashem. That a regular person, when he bows down to Shemin Esra, he bends down by the words Baruch and Ata, and by when he reaches Yud Kei Vav Kei, when he reaches Hashem's name by the beginning brachas Shemin Esra, he rises back up. Enkin Amelech, as opposed to the king, Kim Shakara Shubain is like once the king bows down to Shemin Esra, he remains bowed down until the end of Shemin Esra. Though the simple meaning is, why is the halacha this way? Because the king is rightfully very strong and very exalted. Therefore, when it comes to serving Hashem, he needs to go the extra mile, and he needs to indicate more so his bittul to Hashem, because by him, his ego can get out of hand easier than a normal person. So in other words, by the king, it's not a sign of his greatness, but it's a sign of his fragile state. That is the external reason, the reason I'll be nigla. Still in all the plimius in Yonim, when you look at the deeper look at things, when you look at it from the point of view of Chassidus, laheper. Areza laheper, it's just the opposite top of page Yud. The reason why the king does not straighten out to stand upright for the rest of Shemin Esrei, because bittul, being bowed down, that is who he is. Not that who he is exalted, and to forewarn any negative thing, he needs to bow down, just the opposite. In Shemin Esrei, he expresses his true being. The true being of a king is bittul to Hashem. And by the way, Chassidus speaks about this the whole time. Even though in our minds we look at a king, king is mighty and high, and therefore we associate with pride and arrogance and ego and so on. Chassidus says just the opposite. We need to appoint a king because he's supposed to exemplify for us the idea of bittul, and through being bottled to him, we can be bottled to Hashem. He says in line 2, will be explained according, it's understood according to the explanation. They wrote when he came from Petersburg, the famous Igeres HaKodesh called Katainti, the second Igeres HaKodesh in the section Igeres HaKodesh of Tanya. And when he came back from his imprisonment in Petersburg, and he wanted to make sure that the Chassidim don't chas v'sholem use it as an opportunity to be haughty and lord it over their opponents. So he said, because we witness such great kindness of Hashem, it's incumbent upon us to be even more humble than before. Not like the normal mind works. Oh, give a look, who am I? I defeated my opponents. No, just the opposite. Give a look how Hashem showed his closeness to me, and he saved me. And because I'm experiencing Hashem's closeness, that should evoke by me an unbelievable state of humility. The closer someone is to Hashem, much more powerfully, that he is more insignificant, and that's why Yaakov Avinu said, "Katointi, I have become minimized, I have become bottled, Mikoil Chasadim, from all the kindness that you showed me, from helping me overcome and escape love, and I wanted to destroy me." This we understand, right? If we extend this concept, we can understand the same thing of why a king, his very being is bittul more so than an ordinary person. It says in line 5, movement is understood, specifically a king, because of his great quality of how high he is, he has a greater bittul because he's so high, because he appreciates Hashem more, because he's so close to Hashem, he has a greater state of bittul. Therefore, once he bows down by Shemoneh Esrei, he doesn't straighten himself out based on the idea that the king is a greater form of bittul, to such a degree that he never straightens out when he bows down Shemoneh Esrei. So now we can understand why the appointment of a king needs to precede the destruction of Amalek's line 7. That's the explanation of the connection between appointing a king to eradicating Amalek. The idea of appointing a king is a bittul that's beyond reason and understanding. The idea of appointing a king is it's the idea of drawing down the midas into malchus. That's the concept according to Kabbalah and Chassidus. The mitzvah of appointing a king is about bringing down midas into malchus, the erampin of malchus. How come? Where do we see this? So he says like this: Malchus, as we know, is the level of the feminine. Zeir, Ampin, and Malchus is like a chosn and kala. It's ish v'isha. Malchus is the feminine. Nuk, melech u'lashon zachar. The word melech is masculine. Why is that so? Because the purpose is to draw down from the level of melech, the level of the masculine, the level of the midas, which is considered the masculine, into malchus, which is the level of the feminine. And in general, when you talk about the division and also the union that you want to make between the midas and malchus, you're talking also on a broader canvas when you're painting this in the macrocosm. So then Zah represents Soivav Kolalmin, that which transcends the world, because it's still not Silus, it doesn't relate to the world. Malchus is the highest that's enclosed in the world, that's the Malchulam. So Vakavon, B'minin Melech, and the purpose in appointing a king is Amshachas B'chinas HaSoivav, is drawing down the level of Soivav Kolalmin. So again, Keser, the counterbalance to Amalek, Soivav Kolalmin, the super rational level, the unlimited level, the beyond intellect level, which has to counter the irrational mode of Amalek. Finally, it's even higher. The idea of the pointing of the king, that we are drawing down Hashem's essential exaltedness from Hashem's very being, which is higher even than Soiviv. Should come down into Malchus from its root. And this level of Malchus's root, which is the root of Malchus, kingship, is rooted in Hashem's essential exalted state. Through drawing down the masculine in all the levels that we spoke about before, that we're talking about in the Snasus Atzmi and Soiviv and Zer Ampin. Because of this, results the bittul beyond reason and knowledge. We affect the nullification of the clip of Amalek, that the clip of Amalek now becomes nullified as well, becomes eradicated as well. Because you need to have this level that's beyond reason to fight the irrationality of Amalek. That's why it also says, Zachar Asher Aslucha Amalek, Shezachar U'Melashon Zachar. They're both related. Zachar, remember, and Zachar, masculine, is connected one to another, because the masculine is this level of this is beyond the Seder Ishtalshlos, the level that's the super rational level. Similar to what's explained. That what we say in Kriya Shema, you should remember all the mitzvahs of Hashem. So it says over there, she was chartem meloshen zachar, that it's chartem, you should remember, is also from the word, from the expression of the masculine. That's the constant. Drawing down this level of the masculine. We nullified the clip of Amalek because it's the super rational level beyond the whole Seder Ishtal. Last page, Yud Aleph. I say, this is what it says. Remember what Amalek did for you to you. Simon, it concludes, it will be when Hashem will release you and give you rest from all your enemies. Only then will you erase the memory of Amalek. And we asked, what's the connection? Why specifically does the Torah say, why is it not, why is it specifically after he gives you release and arrest from all the enemies that's around you? So the answer is that this is because the idea of zach, remembrance, in the spiritual sense, that's the idea of the drawing down of the masculine, like we mentioned before. It's the same idea with appointing of a king. I was mentioned before, because appointing of a king is drawing down the masculine of Zeir Anpin, or the masculine of Soviet Kalamin, or the masculine of the Snasus Atzmi. And therefore, when there's the level of the appointing of the king, then becomes that Hashem releases you from all your enemies. What does it mean, all your enemies that you're released from before? Amalek says, then becomes the 70 nations. They are all your enemies that we are released from. Then we will also come to eradicating any memory of Amalek as well. Then this is the way we have to do in our own avoid. In our own avoid, we have to have the masculine, we have to have the constant, we have to have the super rational level to fight the irrationality of Amalek. So in our micro battle that we need to have internally, so therefore by in the Minui Melech Avoida through the appointing of the king and the eradicating of Amalek in a person's individual avodah of every single year. We also come to the building of the chosen house. That's in every one. We come to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Like we said, there were 3 mitzvahs of the Yin were commanded when going to Israel, appointing a king, eradicating Amalek, and building the Beis Hamikdash. So in our own avodah, in our own micro avodah, appointing a king, the constancy, the super rationality, the masculine, we come to eradicate Amalek, and then we come to build our individual Beis Hamikdash. By building our own Beis Hamikdash, through doing these 3 things internally in ourselves, we draw down all these 3 things also in the macro for a whole Klal Yisrael. Yamid Melchem Beis David, a king from the house of David will arise, which is the first mitzvah, Minui Melech, appointing a king. And afterwards he will fight the wars of Hashem, and he will be victorious. Part of those wars that he's quoting from the Lashon of the Rambam, and this is included also the eradication of Amalek. That's also part of those wars. And afterwards, the Rambam says, using the Beis Hamikdash from Kaimei, Mashiach will build the Beis Hamikdash on its place in its location. This means practically through the individual redemption, through the micro redemption of every single yid. Will come down also speedily. The general redemption in a way that an everlasting joy is upon their